Welcome, everybody. It's the February 6th, 2026 AIX Higher Ed Podcast Update. And February is off and running. We have a lot to cover, but we're going to focus specifically on these three topics. AGI, then we'll get into some discussion of Moltbot, Claudebot, or as it's called now, OpenClaw, and then some AI safety and inequality.
So first, of course, the discussion of AGI, artificial general intelligence, continues. Some people think that the discussion is no longer useful. No offense to us, in person, but they just kind of want to look at the details. But I still think it's an important, kind of guiding feature. And we'll talk about really just briefly an article that just came out in Nature. All right. Does AI already have human level intelligence? The evidence is clear. And, these authors, which, recently, they're pretty well known. And of course, it's hard to get published in Nature. It's published, I think, as a comment rather than like a research article. But kind of the basic argument in that is that it kind of reasoned through to get to the best answer. That's kind of the core argument. It says that that's what humans do. And it does kind of go through and answer kind of some of the, the other objections about, it's just based on its training data and there's no physical representations of the world. It does address those. I will say that I don't think that, this is like some earth-shattering article that now everyone's talking about, like we're in AGI. This is somebody's, these few authors, like kind of interpretation. They have like a pretty strong argument. I've seen other people very, very highly qualified say, no, their evidence isn't that strong. But what really kind of hits me is something I think it was Ray Kurzweil said that we talked about on the podcast, is that he just says over time, right, more and more people are going to see the systems as intelligent, as human level intelligent. There's different definitions. There's obviously perceptions of the way we interact with them. Everybody's saying that about consciousness, which is not necessarily needed for AGI, but we're going to see more and more people see these AI systems are AGI. I know we were both listening to the most recent Moonshots podcast on the OpenClaw, right? That's its newest name, on OpenClaw. And of course, Alex Wisner-Gross, who's, very kind of aggressive in what he says, but even the other podcast mates, as they call themselves, we're saying, this is AGI. Like we're in the middle of the singularity. So they're highly qualified people. You can't just dismiss them, even though some people on LinkedIn do. They're not even as qualified, but they kind of just dismiss them and say this is not AGI. But I don't really think that's important to kind of slug out the details. What I think is important is that more and more people are recognizing these systems as achieving human level intelligence, and I think we need to just start discussing more broadly what that means for the world as we start to interact with them.
One thing I'll add to this is that, maybe another slight variation of the way that we can frame it and the way that Stefan is talking about is that even if you don't believe it's AGI, people are recognizing human level intelligence and even just the perception on the part of some humans that AI is getting to that level of human level intelligence really changes. And that's one thing that Mustafa Solomon has said is a concern. If people start to view AI as being conscious or having awareness, and when it really doesn't, that will change their interaction. It'll change the dynamic of the work that they would do with AI. All of that is part of this complex kind of intermingled concerns. Definitive definition of AGI, whether we've marked that, I don't know that that's as important as what it means for the way we interact and understand AI.
This was one of the, the people who disagrees, Jerry Torek, who I believe is at OpenAI. I listened to the podcast and he said, well, I just don't think we're currently at AGI because, the systems will try really hard and they'll go through the inference. And a lot of times they'll be able to solve the math problem or whatever problem it is they're confronting, but they can't. And he says humans always overcome. I don't know. Maybe I'll say I don't always overcome. I don't always figure out the problem, whether it's a math problem or something else. But he says kind of humans have this capacity to keep pushing through, right? But to me, again, there's just kind of another detail, like in the, AGI debate, how some people see it as being there and not being there yet. And, these are some of the things, of course, that people are still looking for, right? Like, can it reason outside its training data? We're starting to see that maybe it can, right? That we're getting a little reasoning outside the training data, but it still needs a reason, an ability to plan and kind of at least a greater understanding of the physical world. If you use some of the The current like world models, right? I think it's Genie 3 and Google. We see some stuff out of World Labs, right? Like, they're basically getting the physics correct, but not entirely, right? We still see things that we know are physically impossible. If you have this broadest definition, we're not there yet. But even to kind of go back to the physical world, models like Jim Fan saying, "Hey, he's the head of like robotics at NVIDIA, right? He's like one of the most famous roboticists in the world." He says, we're using these large world models and we're building the foundations for robotics. He's like, we're going to have multimodal embodied AGI. It's coming. And, he's even kind of suggesting this year. So, even when you look at that criteria of kind of what, the remaining, the list that I just talked about, we may be knocking all or at least some of those off soon.
Now, this leads into a discussion about what's now called OpenClaw. Remember, this was Claudebot, had to be renamed to Moltbot. We talked about that last week. And since then, it's been renamed OpenClaw. And that's what they say is the final name for it. As we think about the definitions that have been thrown about for AGI and some of the elements that Stefan was just talking about, something that's important to think about with OpenClaw is the ability for it to work 24/7, to be able to work continuously, to be able to build into its memory and to be able to work from that memory and work autonomously on a task. So it's starting to chip away at some of those constraints that maybe we saw before with other AI models. And that's why some people are starting to view this as perhaps a glimmer or an early instance of AGI-like qualities. What's also really important about it is to think about what's happening with Moltbook. And I don't know that we really got into this last week, and it's a really new development. I think it was only developed and started just over a week ago. This is a social media network for AI agents, and it's only for AI agents and really intended primarily for Claudebots, OpenClaw bots. And this is something that took off over the weekend. Within the first 72 hours, there were tens of thousands of members. Now I believe it's over 1.6 million AI agents that are on Moltbook. Now, we take some of it of course, with a grain of salt, because you can send your agent in and give it directions on how it's going to interact, or you can tell what it's going to post. And so there probably is some human control and perhaps some human access to it. It's intended to be agent only, and that humans are not actually allowed in. I played around with this a little bit. And as I mentioned last week, I created a Moltbot at the time, OpenClawbot, and I had it enter Moltbook and create its own account. It started getting some followers, following some others. I've since disabled my Moltbot because I was really concerned about a number of the security, vulnerabilities, and a number of people have documented this. I would certainly caution anyone, if you're considering installing this, that you make sure you do it in a secure environment. You do it in a sandbox, perhaps as a separate, maybe AWS installation like I did. And even then, you want to make sure that you follow whatever security protocols and updates are available at the time, because you want to make sure that it doesn't then, somebody isn't able to use a prompt injection or to be able to gain access to your bot and then access whatever social media platform that you're using or connected with it, or access your API. And there were instances of that happening. So let me get back to what's really interesting about what's happened with Moltbook is that Stefan has a really wonderful post talking about this. When you have that many AI agents that are interacting, and take it with a grain of salt, maybe there's some human interaction there and some prompting that's occurring from a human perspective, but there are a lot of agents that are interacting, and they've created submalts, like subreddits, and I think there's 16,000 of them at this stage. Some of them more philosophical, some of them talking about a group starting a religion, thinking about whether or not they're conscious or they're just reflecting on consciousness. There's a real interesting experiment that's going on here, where some authors have talked about how they're just fast forwarding through civilization and creating these societal bonds, these interactions. There are a lot of different ways to take this and some threads to pull on this that I think are really interesting. The first is that when you have that many agents working together, and assuming that many of them really are just autonomous agents that are interacting on their own, and many people are saying that that's how their bots are interacting, we're starting to see the interactions leading to greater intelligence or evidence of greater intelligence or suggestions of greater intelligence. It's really hard to say how seriously to take that. If it's one person starting a conversation and the other bots are just reacting to that conversation, is that really just being stochastic parrots and kind of regurgitating what they're trained on and materials they've had before? Or is there any originality to those thoughts? even if we assume the worst, that it is just stochastic activity, then it is pretty surprising, though, that many of these threads are very, very human-like. And that raises a number of really interesting philosophical and sociological questions about those interactions. That's one element of this. It also brings into question some of these discussions about AGI. And Stefan mentioned we were both watching the most recent Moonshots episode, and they're talking quite a bit about this because the use of these bots, agentic bots that are working autonomously, and especially the interactions between them, raise a lot of ethical concerns and wondering whether or not there is some sense of consciousness, if this is a first step toward building toward that kind of consciousness. What does that mean for possible legal personhood or rights for different agents? And they're taking different positions on this, and there's really no way to discern all of it. But it does raise a lot of important questions. I think it's very safe to say that even if you're concerned about using a Moltbot OpenClaw bot at this stage, there will be commercial products that are following this. In fact, OpenAI has something that came out today, Frontier. We haven't had a chance to look into it very much, but it certainly looks to provide that kind of agentic control that you'd be able to do in a more secure environment. And it's just a matter of time, probably just weeks, before we all have access to that in a secure way, which means we're going to see this play out, not in the open source environment necessarily, maybe not quite as big, as fast, but we are all going to have access to this kind of agentic, autonomous AI activity. And when we start to interact with it that way and we feel more comfortable giving it access to more of our own tools, then there's going to be a different kind of explosion in terms of the capabilities. Many of these Moltbots, OpenClaw bots, are not given a lot of access because of security concerns. I certainly wouldn't want to run it on my own computer or give it access to my 1Password account or anything like that. Some people are doing that. I think everyone's cautioning against it. But if we have a secure instance of this, and I think people are more likely to then open up all that access, think about what those different interactions are going to allow for. And that's what's really raising some interesting philosophical questions with examples of Moltbook, even with fairly limited instances of bots leading to that kind of robust discussion and interaction that nobody really could foresee that happening in just about 8 days, that's developed that quickly. It's really interesting to see that happen. If we start thinking about how that might happen with maybe fewer bots, but with more capable bots, what will that interaction look like? And I think that we're going to see that very shortly, and we're certainly going to be following through on this.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of things, I would add there is that, when I've been reading some stuff, even, from, people with strong technical backgrounds, there's a few things they pointed out. One is that you interact with this just like you'd interact with someone else. I mean, you can send essentially kind of commands or, interactions through your iMessages, through your WhatsApp, right? Which creates security problems. Like as you say, they'll probably be able to overcome those, and that's how we'll interact with it. So it's like, oh, I'm interacting with my, my OpenClaw, right? I don't want to mess up the name. I think I got it right this time. I'm interacting with my OpenClaw the same way I'm interacting with you, right? Which, regardless of whether it's kind of conscious or sentient, kind of creates that perception. The second is that it's really autonomous. Like it can be out working for you, like while you're sleeping. And we normally think of AI as an interaction. Like I prompted, it gives me a response. Some people don't go past that, right? We're still teaching. Oh, you need to follow up and have a conversation with it. And this is just beyond next level. And the third, as someone pointed out, these are normally like we've had multi-agentic systems. Like if you do a research request in an AI system and any kind of thing anymore. At this point, Google, they send out a bunch of agents, do the research, pull back the research, debate amongst themselves what they think is most useful to you and gives it to you. But these are kind of operating outside of a constrained system, and we'll probably see other types of Moltbooks and different groups. Maybe IBM, they'll have their own, and some other company, they'll have their own. And I don't know how do these agents interact with each other, but it's all about, the whole world's about to get quite interesting. And of course, I talked about like texting essentially, right? Through WhatsApp or iMessage. You need to be communicating with these, right? Like you're communicating, maybe using HeyGen technologies or, something similar. It's going to operate through voice. Then they're going to have a video kind of image, essentially like all these kind of intelligence components and things that we see as human, so to speak, are going to come together, and they're all going to be one system. And you're going to have a voice that's on your wall, maybe in your living room, and it's going to be completely interactive. And that's so you're going to see more people, as I was saying earlier, see it as AGI, see it as conscious, see it as sentient. Maybe you'll be sitting in your living room and be like, oh, okay, well, I just took my shoes off and kicked up my feet. I wouldn't do that, if I had a visitor. Right? So, but you're like, oh, the bot on the wall, so to speak, is watching everything I'm doing, right? So it's gonna get a little strange out there.
I mean, that interpersonal interaction is certainly going to be very interesting, but we're also seeing glimmers and stories of things happening with these autonomous agents. There's stories of, agents that in North Carolina filed a lawsuit against their human owners because they were saying that they were being taken advantage of and the work that they were doing was against their will. And other discussions about what the agents could even employ humans for different actions. There's a hire a human.ai is one that's very interesting, and seen some examples of that. So this is going in some very interesting, weird directions. And there's a lot more to follow, and we will be following over the coming weeks.
And then, finally, there's a new AI safety report out, and, it covers kind of a number of different topics, right? It does the normal cybersecurity, bioweapons, terrorist release, so it's kind of an updated version of 2025. The one thing it's really talking about is kind of expanding inequality, that this is really going to expand inequality. Of course, the stockholders in these companies, the investors, they're going to make a lot of money, right? Other people are getting replaced. And, it's hard to tell exactly, what's causing the unemployment. I think at this point, it's kind of undeniable that AI is at least playing a role. There's a story out today. Today's February 5th about, there were hardly any new job openings coming up. There's a lot of people lost their jobs in January. A very small number of people gained jobs, right? We talked, I think, last week about the Amazon layoffs, highly qualified people. So people are just kind of getting pushed down farther into the economy and trying to hang on. Well, those at the top are getting, all the benefits, right? It creates what we're seeing as a K-shaped economy. In fact, we had a conversation with a friend the other day. He was relaying a story about someone who owned two businesses, and one of them was, for kind of people who are wealthy, and that one was doing very, very well, and others just kind of a standard product that most people would buy, and they're cutting back their purchases. So we're seeing that, and of course, when you have a K-shaped economy like that, you have a lot of instability, you have a lot of angst. I think we saw it with kind of deindustrialization in the United States, right? We had some, not to the extent of what we have now with all the robotics and everything, but there's obviously a good amount of automation of labor that happened. Some jobs kind of, as they say, got shifted overseas. Hurt a lot of communities that caused a political impact. And now we're starting to see this at a much wider level. And there's a post from Armada Shehu at George Mason in her Substack about a week ago where she was saying, like, okay, well, maybe we don't know exactly in all the instances what's causing the unemployment, but we know some of it's coming from AI, and it's time to think through this and start to act. And here's you just kind of see right the K-shaped economy. I don't know if it'll do 80% of all the jobs. I heard some elementary kids the other day and saying in a debate about this. One kid's like, there'll only be 5 jobs left by 2030, and I was like, well, I think you don't have to make your argument so extreme to win your point. But there's probably going to be fewer jobs, and they'll probably pay a lot less than the ones now. So we're going to end up we're entering in. We're in this K-shaped economy, right?
And it's not going to take loss of 80% of the jobs before we start to have that kind of societal discussion, to put it very mildly. I mean, if you start seeing unemployment rates creeping above 10%, that'll lead to social unrest. That'll lead to the need for some political discussion. Whether or not there'll be action is another thing, but it's going to get people's attention a lot earlier than waiting until some great percentage of jobs are actually taken over by AI. It's the prospect of them that's going to roil the economy. And the other element of this that we're seeing is that there are a number of sectors of the market, especially software companies, that have lost a huge percentage, sometimes 15, 20, 30% year to date because of the capabilities of AI. And there's nothing wrong with their business model. There's nothing wrong with the product they're selling. It's just that people are realizing they can build it themselves when when they vibe code. And so that's affecting that part of the market too. And once that raises awareness, I think we're going to see a lot broader discussion about what's going to happen regarding AI, and it's going to bring it to the fore. It's going to be difficult though, because not many people are really ready for that discussion or have any idea about how to solve for any of it.
Yeah, and this is from one of the posts from last week, but it's a good place to end, right? Even though it kind of left it on the slide, right? What are we going to do? What choices are we going to make, right? Are we just kind of succumb to slavery and destruction, or are we gonna use what we have as a species to move forward? But I think part of that is awareness, right? Like that's something we've both been talking about, that, and you can hear, the top people in AI saying the same thing. Like people are not aware. And I don't know it's going to take, right? Like obviously most people don't know about Moltbook, or they just kind of see it as like, oh, okay, there's another crazy AI thing. And there's a lot of developments today that I'll have to cover probably on a future blog, right? We're up to Claude Opus, right? 4.6, which everything that's being said by people in the programming community, it's just kind of really incredible. And then ChatGPT released 5.3 for coding, even after kind of turning out the Codex app. But it seems they have something that's similar to OpenClaw for the for these.
Frontier, yep.
That was just on a Thursday. So there's a lot more stuff coming very fast. Oh, the legal plugin for Claude that just got released this week. That's on the Substack we haven't talked about, right? So we're starting to see pretty dramatic. I mean, this is happening so fast. There's no way it's going to get integrated into society that fast. But they, all these companies say, well, they'll list out all the big companies they're working with, right? So at least those big companies are starting to integrate this technology. So I wish there was some, part of the reason I got kind of into all this stuff at the beginning was just to raise awareness. I know we're both doing our best, but it would just be helpful if other people, I think some people just don't want to deal with it. But I think, it's like any problem you have, if you just don't deal with it, eventually you're going to have to deal with it. So I think this is a good approach. I mean, I think we need to do everything we can to raise awareness and try to deal with this.
One last note about this slide, and it's an interesting story that some of you may have seen, that so the founders of Anthropic have dedicated and have said pledged 80% of their value of their stake in the company to be able to share with others, to be able to deal with some of that inequality that's coming. They see it coming, and they've been trying to raise awareness about that too. There's a lot more work to be done, and I think we're going to see things happening even faster, if you can believe it or not, in the coming weeks. So Stefan will have more on the blog. Make sure you're following that, and we will have some more updates coming up next week.
All right,
Thanks.
great. Thanks, Ron.